Welcome back to True Crime Lounge podcast on YouTube and Spotify. I do have a Patreon that you can join for early access to episodes scheduled to come out. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. With that being said, let's dive into today's episode, shall we? Um, so, for today's episode, we're going to be talking about Richard Cottingham, the torso killer of Times Square. So how did this family man turn into a serial killer? Well, we'll have to go back to what we believe is his first known murder. Richard first Richard Cunningham committed his first known murder at 20 years old, though he claimed that he had started in his teens. He's known as a serial rapist, abductor, and ephebophilic serial killer, primarily attracted to mid to late post-adolescents. Cunningham is considered one of the worst serial killers in the U.S. history. He became known as the Torso Killer in the Times Square Whipper. From 1967 to 1980, Cunningham killed at least 9 females and attempted to kill another 4. Though he's never claimed he has nearly he though he claimed he nearly have 100 victims. Surprisingly, at one point, he played a part in the average father of 3 living in suburban New Jersey, commuting from Manhattan to Manhattan for his respectable job with a prestigious insurance company. But all appearances, he was an upstanding citizen. Oh, Mark Barn. So, let's go to his early years. Maybe that can give us an insight into the mind of why he did what he did. Well, he was born November 25th, 1946 in Mont Haven, New York City. And Cottingham was the first of 4 children. In 1948, his family moved to Dumont, New Jersey, and in 1956 in Riverdale, um, guys, I can't make this up, where he harbored a secret interest in bondage pornography. And in 1964, he graduated from Pasquette Valley High School in Hillsdale, New Jersey. Richard Cottingham, also known as Stick, worked as a Metropolitan Life in Manhattan during the 1970s as a mainframe computer operator. When Now his criminal career would begin after his graduation, and he began working for Metropolitan Life at the firm's headquarters in Manhattan, where his father was the company's vice president, and he started in the mailroom and worked his way up to the mainframe computer operator. And after taking programming courses, he then became a computer operator for Blue Cross Blue Shield Association in New York, where he worked there until he was arrested in 1980. While working at Blue Cross, he was a colleague of Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, who's also lived in New York under the alias John Berger. And I do plan to covering the dating game killer eventually, just not right now. I have so many episodes that need to be done that I really gotta get through them. But neither one of them claim to know each other. I still wonder, like, if serial killers look by, it's like, hey, I knew that guy, or I worked with that guy, or something like that. I still want to know. I'm curious on that. But on May 3rd, 1970, he married Janet Janet Cottingham at Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Queens Village. They had 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. In April of 1978, his wife filed for divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty and abandonment. She claimed he refused to have sex with her after their 3rd child, leaving her with insufficient income to pay bills and staying out all night without returning home until the next morning. She withdrew a petition after his arrest in 1980 and then completed the divorce in 1981. On October 3rd, 1969, he was convicted of driving while intoxicated in New York City. In 1972, he was convicted of shoplifting at Starnes department store and sentenced to pay a $50 fine. In 1973, he was arrested for robbery, sodomy, and sexual abuse of a prostitute. This case was dismissed. In March 1974, he was arrested in New York City. in the unlawful imprisonment of a prostitute, but the victim did not appear, so the case was again dismissed. Interestingly enough, the case was dismissed. In the 1970s, Times Square was considered one of the most dangerous parts of New York City, and yet it's a very major popular tourist attraction today. In the 1970s, Times Square was considered. So, what about the disturbing discovery? In the 1970s, New York Times Square was a proliferation of go-go bars, peep shows, sex shops, and adult theaters. The streets were dark, gritty, and dangerous. Little did anyone know it was about to become a hit hunting ground for one of America's most prolific serial killers. For about 6 months between 1979 and 1980, he brutally murdered 8 workers in Times Square. And on December 2nd, 1979, the first responders were called to the Travel Inn near Times Square. As they entered room 417, they saw 2 badly burned bodies on the twin bed. A firefighter grabbed one of the ministers a life-saving procedure, but noticed something disturbing. The first responder would go on to say that I was preparing to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when I noticed there was no head. When the smoke had cleared, the firefighters realized that they had discovered something out about the Ratisse nightmares. The women in the room had been strangled and their hands had been cut off before the monsters drenched the bodies in lighter fluid in the fire. Dita Gudarzi and Valerie Anstreet. One victim identified was 22-year-old Dita Guzzardi, a sex worker who had traveled from Iran to the U.S. as a young teenager. And at 18, she ran away from home in Long Island and began working on the streets of New York. She had a daughter who was given up for adoption at age 4 due to her mom's frequent arrest. The arrest? The other female victim was identified as a 16-year-old young girl who remains a strange doe to this day. And police had little to go on. The man had checked into the hotel with an alias Carl Wilson of Maryland, New Jersey, but the hotel staff had barely interacted with him. They only had a vague description of the man in his stories about 5'10", 175 pounds, with brown hair. We don't Deputy Chief Richard Nicosto would go and say that we don't know if he's one of the ones who rented the room. We're not ruling out the possibility of 2 men that could have been involved. Several months will go on, and on May 5th, 1980, a housekeeper at the Quality Inn in New Jersey found a body of a 19-year-old Valerie Anstreet. Valerie had a difficult life. She left Florida on April 30th and traveled to New York. A man picked her up on Madison Avenue and East 32nd Street, and John took her to a Quality hotel along Route 17 in New Jersey, and she was checked into a room on the 132 named Sherry Dudley. On March 5th, a motel worker, Marianne Sancanelli, began cleaning out room 132 when she found a large bundle of sheets. When she removed the body, she found the body. Valerie had been handcuffed, gagged, with white adhesive tapes and 2 ligature marks on the neck. Investigators also noticed that her nipples had been lacerated and she had been struck several times with a blunt instrument. Valerie would lead Cottingham's arrest. Nancy Shaba would and Diane Cusick were Cottingham's first 2 known victims. His first victims, Nancy Shaba and Diane Cusick. Cunningham's murder spree had started a few years earlier. However, on October 28, 1967, he strangled Nancy, 29, a mom of 2, in Little Ferry, New Jersey. Her new body, found bound in front of her, was found, and she was placed in the passenger seat of the car under a blanket. She was last seen 3 days earlier when she left home to go play bingo with her friends at a local church. Her murder remains a mystery until August 2010 when Cottingham confessed and pled guilty. His second known victim, Diane Kosnick, was 23 on February 15, 1968. She left home to buy shoes at Green Acres Mall in, it makes me want to go Green Acres, anyway, in Valley Stream, New York, where she was found raped, beaten, and strangled to death in the backseat of a car parked near the mall. Cottingham was not charged with her murder until June 2022, when he was linked to the crime by DNA. This dog detectives, especially Robert Zolli of the New Jersey Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, and was a young detective whenever he was tasked with investigating several unsolved murders dating back to the 1960s. Beginning in 2014, Cottingham confidentially admitted to Azalates in that he murdered three teenage girls between 1968 and 1969. Jacqueline Hart, Irene Blas, and Denise Velasca. On July 17, 1968, Jacqueline Hart, 13, who was ambushed by walking home from school band practice in Midland Park, New Jersey, was strangled and beaten with a band flag sling. Irene Blas was 18 and she vanished April 7, 1969, from Hackensack, New Jersey, and was later found down 4 feet of water in Saddle River, and she had been strangled with a wire cord and perhaps a chain of crucifix she was wearing around her neck. Diane Talasaka was 15 and she was abducted July 14, 1969, in Emerson, New Jersey, while walking to a friend's house, and she was found the next morning in Saddlebrook, New Jersey. By the side of a road next to a cemetery, she had been strangled with a chain of crucifix necklace and dumped in the killer's car. Laurie McGraw was one of the torso victims in March 1970. There were also more victims to this case. In August 2022, officials negotiated a non-prosecution agreement before court corroborating and accepting his confession as murder to Lorraine McGraw, who was beaten and strangled to death on March 1, 1970. Her naked body was found 2 days later along a hiking trail in old Camp Bluefields water tower in New York. In December 2022, Cottingham was convicted of Diane's murder from 1968 and admitted to killing four additional women: Mary Beth Hines, Laverne Moy, Sheila Hellman, and Maria Emerita Neves, in Long Island, New York, from 1972 to 1973. There is some unresolved business, however. For many years, Cottingham trickled out details of his murders in dog detectives, allowing Detective Azalate to close numerous cold cases, but there were two unsolved cases that Cottingham refused to talk about: the 1974 murders of Marianne Pryor, who was 17, and the murder of Lorraine Marie Kelly, who was 16. And finally, in April of 2022, he pled guilty to kidnapping the two young girls and raping them for days before drowning them in a motel bathtub. The teenagers were last seen August 9, 1974, in North Bergen, and they had left their homes to travel 13 miles to Paramus Mall, telling their parents they were taking a bus to go shopping for bathing suits for an upcoming trip to the New Jersey shore. Witnesses told authorities that they had been hitchhiking and getting into a man's car. 5 days later, their naked and beaten bodies were found face down in the rooms. This unique bond led to a confession. Cottingham brought from the state prison in Trenton to the prosecutor's permanent office 3 times during April to finally admit to the murders of Lorraine and Marianne. And the detective had only days to solve the case before retiring from the force. He would go on to say that seeing how many families were destroyed you can't help but feel the pain. And I think he figured he was just going to toy with them for as long as he could drag it out. Ancelotti and Cottingham first met 18 years ago and developing a unique bond. Cottingham was sometimes mean to others and nice to Anzazate, and he would transfer his inmate to his office 75 miles each way, where the two of them would play cards and eat pizza with other detectives. When it was only the two of them, he would begin to question him about the unresolved cases, and it seemed that the detective had found Cunningham's vulnerability. Cottingham would talk excessively on the way back to the prison each time, telling him more and more details about the murders of the girls, and he would secretly take notes while sitting in the front seat. For 6 years, he finally began mentioning details only the murder that he would know. He said that I will give you the case, for Pryor and Kelly, and I won't ever see you again. He enjoys our relationship and he enjoys spending our time. He would then send Cottingham and told him that he was retiring. He wanted to close the case on Pryor and Kelly, and it took 3 meetings to gain an official confession. And on April 14th, 2022, he pled guilty. And April 20th, the detective refused to give up, and in turn, he was able to ensure justice prevailed and give closure to the families. He spent decades waiting for an answer. Befriending a killer. Jennifer Wise is daughter of the prostitute Dita Goodarzi, who was uh, who he brutalized and beheaded in a hotel in 1979. As the daughter of a murder victim, it's hard to imagine forgiving the murder. Everybody deserves to be forgiven in life, she will go on to say. And the magnitude of what he did is unfathomable. But I did become friends with Richard for my mother's sake and for my quest. Jennifer Wise was the daughter of her. Tragically, she did befriend him to learn the location of her mother's head and potentially close other unsolved cases. And she solved the questions in her recovery from breast cancer provided her the courage to pursue the truth. And she desperately wanted to find her skull, and that was the driving force behind why she was doing it. Although she had no assurance of what he told her, she gathered bits and pieces of the truth and later saying that she did it for her mom, who lost her daughters for her own mother. Jennifer recounted a meeting with Cottingham, and she would say that he was sitting there in the window with a visit of a sheet of glass between us. Although the image of him was a little frightening, I wasn't scared because he was behind the glass and I was more concerned about finding out my mom and driving force. With Cunningham in ill health, it is Jennifer's hope that she would he will want to tell her once and for all where the remains of her mom are. Is he still alive? Cunningham, 75, is still serving a life sentence in Southwest State Prison in New Jersey. It is tragic to think about the brutal crime and unimaginable pain caused by the victims, that he caused his victims and families. He has lived to the ripe old age, and let's hope there is some solace, knowing that he will never be a free man. Alright, that's it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a